page 26. The History of Human Marriage by Edward Westermarck, 1891. In 3 volumes, Volume 1. 0.2. Introduction. On the method of investigation 1 of 3. The method followed in the present work is the comparative method, which for half a century has been dominant among British students of social anthropology. When applied to the study of human civilization, this method starts from the fact that there are great similarities between the products of culture such as implements, weapons, objects of art, customs, institutions, and beliefs among different peoples and different countries. Weapons, for example, are classed under spear, club, sling, bow and arrow, and so forth. Myths are divided under such headings as myths of sunrise and sunset, eclipse-myths, earthquake myths, and local myths which account for the names of places by some fanciful tale. Under religious beliefs and practices there are animism, totemism, ancestor-worship, polytheism, monotheism. Under institutions occur, for instance, marriage, clanship, chieftainship, slavery, and under each heading there are subheadings, like marriage by consideration, monogamy, polygyny, polyandry, group marriage. These classifications of the various details of culture, as Tylor remarks, may be compared with the species of plants and animals as studied by the naturalist. To the ethnographer, the bow and arrow is a species, the habit of flattening children's skulls is a species, the practice of reckoning numbers by tens is a species. The geographical distribution of these things, and their transmission from region to region, have to be studied as the naturalist studies the geography of his botanical and zoological species. And the same is true of social institutions and their various aspects. But the task of comparative sociology is not restricted to that of classifying the different phenomena of culture with a view to making out their distribution in geography and history. Its ultimate object is, of course, the same as that of every other science, namely, to explain the facts with which it is concerned, to give an answer to the question, why? Hence, when similar customs, beliefs, legends, or arts, are found among different peoples, the question arises how the similarity is to be accounted for. In answer to this question Tylor made the following general statement. Sometimes it may be ascribed to the like working of men's minds under like conditions, and sometimes it is a proof of blood relationship or of intercourse, direct or indirect, between the races among whom it is found. Sir James G. Fraser likewise speaks of the essential similarity in the working of the less developed human mind among all races, which corresponds to the essential similarity in their bodily frame revealed by comparative anatomy. But, he adds, while this general mental similarity may, I believe, be taken as established, we must always be on our guard against tracing to it a multitude of particular resemblances which may be and often are due to simple diffusion, since nothing is more certain than that the various races of men have borrowed from each other many of their arts and crafts, their ideas, customs, and institutions. I quote these statements in reply to the charge made in a presidential address to the anthropological section of the British Association a few years ago, that where similarities are found in different parts of the world it is assumed by the leading school of British anthropologists, almost as an axiom, that they are due to independent origin and development. So little is this charge in accordance with facts that Tylor, in his pioneer work Researches into the Early History of Mankind, found it hard to account for the occurrence in so many distant times and places of customs like the cure by sucking and the couvade, and of superstitions like those connected with sneezing, on any other hypothesis than that of deep-lying connections by blood or intercourse, among races which history, and even philology, only know as isolated sections of the population of the world. It is, no doubt, true that the question whether a certain custom or institution has sprung up spontaneously among the people or tribe practicing it, or whether it has been introduced from some other people or tribe, is seldom discussed in comparative treatises. But this by no means implies the assumption of independent origins. On the contrary, when the custom or institution occurs among related or neighboring peoples, there is, at least in many cases, a tendency almost to take for granted that it has been derived from a common source in the different cases that its prevalence is due either to a common descent or to social intercourse. One reason why the question of transmission is not more frequently discussed is the lack of evidence in the case of peoples whose history is unknown to us. Tylor justly spoke of the constant difficulty in deciding whether any particular development is due to independent invention, or to transmission from some other people to those among whom it is found, and this difficulty has certainly not been removed by later investigations. Dr. Grebner lays down two main criteria which, he thinks, enable us to trace similar culture phenomena to a common source. First, the criterion of form, as he calls it, that is, correspondence of qualities not inherent to the nature of the object, and secondly, that of quantitative correspondence, that is, the coincidence of several phenomena between which there is no necessary and intrinsic connection. But when customs are concerned, it may be doubted whether either criterion is, generally, sufficient to save the conclusion from being much more than a mere guess, unless the peoples in question belong to the same race or may on linguistic, historical, or geographical grounds be supposed to have had contact with each other. And even in such cases it may often be difficult or impossible to decide with certainty whether similar customs have a common origin or not. Dr. Grebner himself admits that it is possible, although not proved, that identical customs grow up independently among peoples in different parts of the world. If so, it is obviously also possible that identical customs grow up independently among peoples who are of the same stock or have come into contact with one another. Indeed, the more similar two peoples are, the greater is the probability that also new details in their culture should resemble each other. From seeds of the same kind very similar plants spring up. If the custom of providing a bride with a marriage portion is found among different Indo-European peoples, we are not therefore entitled to assume that this custom is either an inheritance from the primitive Indo-European period or has in historical times been adopted by one people from the other. And if marriage by purchase is found among two unrelated neighboring tribes, it is by no means certain that one of them has borrowed this custom from the other, however many coincidences there may be in their culture. It is strange that the method of the modern German school, which is so unfriendly to the idea of independent origins and in every case where British anthropologists see evolution, either in the forms of material objects or in social and religious institutions, sees only the evidence of mixture of cultures, that this very method should itself have independently originated in two countries the peoples of which are partly of the same race and have had culture contact also in later days. Dr. Rivers says, I have been led quite independently to much the same general position as that of the German school by the results of my own work in Oceania. If customs and institutions and ideas could speak, they might also perhaps be justified in defending themselves against the suspicion of being mere borrowings. To this Dr. Grebner would say, as he has indeed said in a general way, that in cases of parallelism we must not apply European evidence to savages, who almost entirely lack the conscious endeavor after further development. It seems as though he regarded the customs of savages as almost unchangeable, unless subject to influences from without. But there is sufficient proof that they are not so. Among the Central Australians, for instance, changes in aboriginal custom take place from time to time, and Messrs. Spencer and Gillen are of opinion that these changes are in part due to the influence of individuals of superior ability. They write, after carefully watching the natives during the performance of their ceremonies and endeavoring as best as we could to enter into their feelings, to think as they did, and to become for the time being one of themselves, we came to the conclusion that if one or two of the most powerful men settled upon the advisability of introducing some change, even an important one, it would be quite possible for this to be agreed upon and carried out. Dr. Landman tells me that during his stay among the Kiwi-speaking people of New Guinea he was struck by the fluctuations of their habits and customs independently of all foreign influence. The funeral customs, for instance, have greatly changed within the memory of the present generation in a manner which, partly at least, excludes the possibility of influence either from neighboring tribes or from the whites. Indeed, do not the frequent variations of custom in neighboring related tribes, or within the same tribe, by themselves show that the customs of a people are subject to spontaneous changes also at the lower stages of culture? Page 30. And if this is the case, it is only natural that the changes often should lead to similar results in different instances. For the possibilities in cultural development are always limited, and often limited in a very high degree. For example, it is necessary that the bodies of the dead should be disposed of in some way or other, and there are not many methods to choose between, hence the same method must be in use among different peoples, quite independently of any culture contact. For my own part, I cannot find that there is any reasonable ground for quarreling between the ethnological school, which particularly studies the influence that one people has exercised upon another owing to contact of their cultures, and the evolutionary school. Their subjects of investigation differ, and therefore also their methods. Both schools deal with resemblances of culture phenomena, but whilst the evolutionary school chiefly endeavors to find the psychological and sociological origin of these phenomena, the ethnological school is concerned with their wanderings. The two kinds of investigation supplement each other, and their results should exercise a wholesome influence on each other, but they cannot replace each other. To regard the ethnological analysis of culture relations as the chief task of the history of civilization, as some German scholars do as superscript 1, is to deprive this science of its loftiest aims and also to disregard many of its most important achievements. It should be remembered that even when the historical connection between customs found among different peoples has been well established, the real origin of the customs has not been explained thereby. It is not a sufficient explanation of a custom to say that it has been derived from ancestors or borrowed from neighbors. This only raises the question how it originated among those who first practiced it, for a custom must have had a beginning. It is with questions of this sort that the evolutionary school of sociologists have preeminently occupied themselves. And their comparative method has greatly helped them in their task. The simultaneous occurrence of certain social phenomena in many different groups of people may prove that there is a causal connection between them, though no such connection is proved by their simultaneous occurrence in a single group. It was this fact that led Tylor to his statistical method of investigating the development of institutions. Moreover, a comparison of the circumstances in which a custom is practiced by different peoples may lead to the discovery of the motive underlying it. For example, a comparative study of the practice of human sacrifice shows that human victims are frequently offered in war, before a battle, or during a siege for the purpose of stopping or preventing epidemics in order to put an end to a devastating famine when the earth fails to supply the people with water with view to averting perils arising from the sea or from rivers, and for the purpose of preventing the death of some particular individual, especially a chief or a king. And from these facts we are justified in drawing the conclusion that human sacrifice is, largely at least, a method of life insurance, based upon the idea of substitution, whilst the famine sacrifice and the principle underlying it lead to the supposition that the frequent custom of securing good crops by means of such a sacrifice, even when there is no famine, may also be traced to the same principle, especially as there are obvious links between this custom and the actual famine sacrifice. Very frequently the knowledge of the cause of a certain custom found among one people helps us to understand the meaning of the same, or more or less similar, customs among other peoples. Little details which by themselves would hardly attract our attention may, when viewed in the light of the comparative method, become conclusive evidence or, in other cases, lead to valuable suggestions, some of which may be within the range of future confirmation. In this way the customs and institutions of savages have thrown rays of light on the early history of civilized nations. The endeavor of the evolutionary school to discover the psychical causes of social phenomena, however, has of late been subject to criticism. Dr. Rivers writes, "The proper task of the sociologist is the study of the correlation of social phenomena with other social phenomena, and the reference of the facts of social life to social antecedents, and only when this has been done, or at any rate when this process has made far greater advances than at present, will it be profitable to endeavor to explain the course of social life by psychological processes. 1 At present sociology and social psychology should, so far as possible, be treated as if they were independent disciplines, because each of them is liable to make assumptions, belonging to the other science, which are readily mistaken for explanations. But through pure sociology we may ultimately hope to attain knowledge of social psychology, though this channel must be long and tortuous." The question why such a course should be necessary, and why we cannot follow the more obvious way of inquiring directly into the motives which actuate the conduct of men as members of society, is answered by Dr. Rivers as follows. "Among the people whose social conduct has been the special object of my own investigations, there is no more difficult task than that of discovering the motives which lead them to perform social actions. There is no more depressing and apparently hopeless task than that of trying to discover why people perform rites and ceremonies and conform to the social customs of their community. Moreover, it has been gradually recognized that social conduct is not directed by intellectual motives, but, predominantly, often it would seem exclusively, by sentiments or even instincts, and no mental states are more difficult to introspect than emotions and sentiments, to say nothing of instincts." Page 33.